How you guys doing? It's good to be back. My name's Adam. I still go here. It's been a minute. Stop with your condescending claps over there. Man, what a message from that song, that he's never failed. And I don't know if you feel that way in your life. Sometimes it's hard to sing songs like that if you're going through something, but here's what I'll say to you. You're here. You're here. You're still breathing. God's still moving in your life, even if you aren't aware of it. So, all right, listen, here's my problem. I've been off for 3 weeks, so I've been doing a lot of stuff and thinking about a lot of things, and I have too many things to say and not enough time in which to say it. So instead of cutting it, I'm going to try and say it faster, because that's what pastors do. So, and I'm hopefully not going to fail. So let's get going. I want to start this morning with a complaint about the Bible, which you're not supposed to do, right? Pastor, you're not supposed to talk about complaints about the Bible. But listen, I've been lead pastor for 12 years, and I've sat in a lot of living rooms and talked about the Bible, and I've heard some consistent things over and over and over again. And I think they're valid. They're valid complaints, not that they're it's not a good thing, but I think they make sense, and I understand why people come to these places. So the complaint has to do with two things that happen in the Bible on a super regular basis that are rare in our life. Two things that happen in the Bible on a regular basis, but they're rare in our life. One is that the main characters of the Bible are spoken directly to audibly by God. They have literal, audible information, instruction from God, right? Adam and Eve, don't eat the fruit, right? Noah, build a really, really big boat. Abraham, leave your home and have a baby when you're 100 years old. They're not confused as to what God wants for them, from them, right? It's very clear, very obvious. And the crazy part for us is, you read those stories, and even though they had the audible instruction of the Lord, they still struggle. They still struggle. And we're going, man, I wish I had God tell me what to do. Because you have questions in your life right now that you can't open up your Bible and turn to a chapter that has your name at the top and tell you what person to marry or what school to go to or what job to take, right? You don't have that. And it's hard for us sometimes when we read those stories. So that's the first complaint. People are man, okay, I read the Bible and these people get talked to by God. And we don't have that. And then the second thing that causes a complaint about the Bible is that the supernatural happens at such a high rate in the Bible. The amount of miracles per page of the Bible is disproportional to the amount of miracles that happen per page of my life. Right? You just see it happen constantly in the Bible. You got seas parting, fire falling from heaven, blind eyes seeing, deaf ears hearing. You have all these supernatural things happening in the Bible, and then you look at your life and you're The supernatural almost seems normal in the Bible. Now, here's the thing. If we actually back up and look at it, the Bible spans thousands of years, and let's be honest, they wrote the stories about the stuff where God did move in obvious ways. They didn't write and the next morning he woke up and had peanut butter toast for breakfast, right? So they left the parts off that are boring, which is the most of our life, right? So I just kind of want to, even though it feels like the supernatural is happening all the time in the Bible, it's not. But we still look at that. And if I know I'm making an assumption. You're reading the Bible in your life. That's an assumption, right? But if you're reading the Bible in your life, and you're reading about all these stories about people having God speak to them and these miraculous supernatural things happening, two things can happen to you. Two problems can arise. One, it's hard to learn from those people who are having those things happen in their life when they're not happening in yours, right? You can have a hard time learning from them if they have such a different, I would say maybe spiritual experience than you feel like you're having. That's just true. The second problem is a little more serious. Seeing God speak and move so obviously and overtly in the Bible, what can happen to you is you can feel like if you don't hear his voice or see him move in some miraculous way, then he must not be speaking, he must not be moving in your life. And you don't automatically go there, but I think it's one of those things that can kind of creep inside of you sometimes. You read in the Bible, you see God speaking, God doing miracle here, miracle there. And then you look at your life and you go, man, I don't know, maybe God's not speaking to me at all. Maybe God's not moving in my life at all, because you don't see him moving the same kind of way he did in that story as he did in your life. Like if there's no booming voice from heaven, God's not speaking to you. Like if there's no miraculous happening, God must not be moving. And I get it, and I want to say, Christian, listen, if you're a Christian, I think you should long for those things. I think you should long to hear God's voice. I think you should long to see God move in miraculous and amazing ways in your life. I think that's good. But it's a dangerous conclusion to come to, that if you don't hear him speak or you don't see him move, that he isn't speaking or moving. So what I want to do here is today, I want to try and answer the question, what should be our mindset when we don't hear a voice from heaven? When the supernatural doesn't happen, what should our mindset be? I don't even think we're going to get to what to do. I just think we're going to talk more about how should you think about those situations? What is the mindset to have when you're kind of living in the monotonous rather than the miraculous? Okay, does that make sense? That's what we're going to go after today. So what we're doing here in the next couple of weeks, we're starting a new series today in a book of the Bible where God does not actually boom from heaven one time in the story. No speaking parts for God in this story. And no supernatural happens. 0 miracles in this book of the Bible either. Matter of fact, God's name isn't even mentioned in this entire book, which is crazy. And I feel like we're going to be able to dig into these questions in this story, because this is one of those stories where you can't have these complaints. Oh, God's speaking, God's moving in these obvious ways. Not here. So we're going to look at this. The story is about a young Jewish girl named Esther. So let me set the stage here if you're not familiar with the story. The people of Israel, the Jewish people, are in captivity in this story, which if you're familiar with the Bible, they seem to be in captivity more than they're free. So they're in captivity this time in the empire of Persia. Persia has laid waste to Israel and they've taken them captive. So now many of the Jewish people are living in the Persian capital, kind of a part of that society now. Now Persia is this monstrous, sprawling empire that just keeps gobbling up other nations. Most powerful empire on the earth at the time. What I want you to see about Esther, and this is really important, because and forgive me, sometimes I don't mean to be mean about it, but sometimes, so I grew up in the church, so I have some complaints about the way Christians are. Sometimes it's just the stuff that I dealt with growing up. So I'm mean about Christians, but I love Christians, most of them. I love Christians, I love them. I'm one of them, but I do have this, when I look back. So when this story was taught to me growing up, Esther is almost painted like a Disney princess. That's the way it was for me. It was in Sunday school, if you remember, you had the flannel graph and she looked like Belle from Beauty and the Beast, and it was painted as this happy story. But here's what I want you to know. I kind of want to set the stage for where Esther is at in her life. One, her people are in captivity. We have no idea what that's like. Her people do not get to make decisions for themselves. There's another country that's come over and taken them over. And that's crazy. That's a terrifying thing. So base level, 30,000 foot view in her life, that's scary. She's in a people who are in captivity and don't get to do what they want. The second thing I want you to know about Esther is that she is an orphan. Both of her parents have died and she's pretty young. And we don't know how long she dealt with that, but that's a heavy thing. And she's living in this country that's not her home. So I want you to imagine what her emotional state would be. If this were a movie, this is not Belle dancing through the streets, singing some song about reading books, right? She is carrying in her soul a burden. She has wounds on her heart that are really serious. And I want you to feel that Esther's not in some great happy place. The story is actually kind of dark. Yeah, more than that. It's really dark if you read it right. So that's Esther. She's got heaviness in her soul. Now, the story in chronological order doesn't start with her. It starts with the king of Persia. Kind of a surprising thing for a book named Esther. Esther chapter 1, verse 1, here's how it starts. These events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. At that time, Xerxes ruled his empire from his royal throne at the fortress of Susa. Now you're thinking Xerxes. Where have I heard that name before? That name sounds familiar. King Xerxes. Well, if you've ever watched the movie 300, if you're old, I guess, and seen the movie 300, it's the same King Xerxes. So if you watch that movie, you have this crazy, creepy, weird dude who thinks he's a god. Believe it or not, in that story, he's crazy, creepy, and weird and thinks he's a god. And in this story, he's kind of crazy, creepy, and weird, and he thinks he's a god. So it's actually a decently accurate portrayal. I don't know if he was like 18 feet tall like they portray him in the movie. Don't watch the movie, it's terrible. That's my official stance. I always have to say that, because they're like, do you think we should watch that? You mentioned the movie. No. Get out of my face. So the first couple verses here, the writer's trying to paint a picture of King Xerxes, right? He rules 127 provinces. From India to Ethiopia, it's this huge, massive landmass. He's king over like most of the world at this point. He commands a 1,000,000-man army. He's the most powerful man on the planet. And it's not just power that he has, though. Check out verse 3. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and nobles of the provinces. The celebration lasted 180 days, a tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. Wow. So the stage here is set, and you're like, who cares that this guy's throwing this party? This is an important part of the story. It starts with a 6-month party, and that's what he's doing. He's setting off the story with a 6-month. That's crazy. 6 months? What's the longest you've ever partied? Don't tell me. In that amount of time, you could do P90X twice. And I know you don't do that anymore because that's not cool anymore, but you could. You could get in real good shape with that. You could get to your 3rd trimester of being pregnant. You could grow like 2/3 of a human in that amount of time, right? If you wanted to have a 6-month ugly Christmas sweater party, you should have started last month. That's how long it is. You should have already started. You should be wearing it right now, because that's how long of a party a 6-month party is. Now, you might be asking, why so long? The answer is actually kind of interesting, besides the fact that he just could. The story takes place right before Xerxes' campaign against Greece, which is interesting. So many scholars believe that the purpose of this party was for Xerxes to try and convince his nobles and his leaders and his generals that they have the chops to go take on Greece. He wanted to show off and say, look how much wealth we have. We can do this thing. So interspersed with the partying was planning sessions and military war councils and all this stuff. So 6-month party. That's how this book starts. Who said the Bible was boring? All right, now here's the thing. You might be wondering, and you should, what does one do when a 6-month party is over? If you ever thought, someday in my life I'm gonna have a 6-month party, and then you're just like, I don't even know what to do next. Well, let me show you. Xerxes knows, verse 5. When it was all over, the king gave a banquet for all the people, from the greatest to the least, who were in the fortress of Susa. It lasted 7 days and was held in the courtyard of the palace garden. So an after party, that's what you do. You have a 180-day party. And if you're wondering how long is the after party supposed to be, it's a week. So you have a 6-month party and then a week-long party. Now, if you want to get a feel for what kind of party this is, drop down to verse 8. I'll show you. By edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. So open bar, no limit. Okay, this is the kind of party. Now, it's worse than that. And just so you know, I'm going to try and keep it like PG-13, but the story is what it is, okay? You have to read it the right way. So, verse 9 kind of gets a little, this is important. It's not just a party, this is where the story turns. At the same time, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day of the feast, when King Xerxes was in high spirits because of the wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who attended him, who have names that are right there on the screen that you can read for yourself in your own head. If you're pregnant, you can pick one of these and that can be your baby name. You'd be really cool. Zethar, I prefer. So those guys, he commands them to bring Queen Vashti to him with the royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. Now, here's my other problem as I grew up, having the story told to me with the Christian goggles on. It's like, oh, isn't that nice? He wanted his wife to meet his friends. Isn't that nice? He's a nice guy. Like, that's kind of the way it was portrayed to me, which is crazy. Because one, even the translation, he was in high spirits because of the wine. Are we not allowed to say drunk in church? He was drunk. 6 months plus 7 days of drinking. He was drunk. He'd made it there. And here's the other reason I know that this wasn't just some nice, like, hey, come meet my buddies. Vashti says no. She says, no, I'm not coming. You have to ask why. If it was just to meet his friends, why would she say no? And then you also have to ask the question, why is Vashti throwing her own party? Did you notice that? She had a party, which makes you think maybe, women weren't invited to Xerxes' party. But let me kind of can we just take our Christian goggles off for a minute? It's not that women weren't invited to Xerxes' parties. It's that wives weren't invited to Xerxes' party. You follow? All the people who haven't been Christians for very long, you follow? Christians are still confused. It was like a bachelor party, but he wasn't a bachelor. But not like let's go like hunting and play basketball. Like, no. It was one of those kind of bachelor parties. But he wasn't a bachelor. The word actually used to describe the party was like a drinking party, but it could have been translated a carousing. Not a word we use very often, but if you want to look that one up later. I always one of my things that I always do when I'm teaching the Bible is encourage people to use their imagination. Don't. Not for this part. But I want you to kind of get a feel. This isn't some happy, shiny, nice, 1950s thing. This is actually dark. So what probably more likely than, come meet my buddies is Xerxes is smashed. There are women at the party, and he turns to his boys and goes, you think these girls are pretty? Bring my wife out, I'll show you what pretty is. And they go to get Vashti, and Vashti's like, he said what? No, I'm not coming. And that's probably the way it went. She wasn't going to be used like that. Now, she said no. She said no. It's pretty impressive. Got to give her credit for that. Now, I think we can learn from every single character in this story, even Xerxes, and this is kind of his moment in the story where the spotlight gets shined on him. So I just want to take a real quick pause and ask, what can we learn from Xerxes besides how to end a marriage in 2 easy steps, which is probably part of it. I think throwing a party like this and then trying to show your wife off in this manner is probably not a great idea. Besides that, I think what you can learn from Xerxes in this first chapter is without God, enough never is. Without God, enough never is. Think about it. Xerxes has everything. I think this is a part of the strategy of the writer here to show you that he's got everything. He's got 127 provinces, not enough, give me Greece. I want the whole world, right? I've got a 6-month party, not enough, give me 7 more days. I'm gonna get drunk, not enough, I want everybody else to get drunk with me. Oh, I've got all these pretty girls at my party, not enough, bring my wife out too. Never is anything that he has enough, and this guy has everything. Right? And this is important in your life because most of us don't have the luxury of finding out what's at the end of some of these roads, right? You're probably not going to hit that Powerball number, right? You're not going to find out how much money is enough. You're always going to think a little bit more, or a little bit more power, or a little bit more prestige, a little bit more fame, a little bit more whatever is your thing. See, the cool part about Xerxes is we actually get to see him get to the end of the road and go, oh man, I'm still not satisfied. It's still not enough. And that's what I want you to know. If you're not a Christian, you're sitting here, this is, in my opinion, one of the good evidences for God is that for some reason your soul longs for something you've not experienced yet and you haven't found it yet. I want to argue that you're never going to find it. That your soul was created to long for its creator. And I would at least propose to you that you should look in that area in your search. Look to God. If you are a Christian, you have to ask the question, how am I living? If I'm living perpetually dissatisfied, is it because I'm not trying to find my satisfaction in God? Have I placed God in this secondary or put him on a shelf somewhere in my life, and I take him off when I need him and I put him back when I don't? And maybe that's why, because God is not your source. You're looking to other things. And I think Xerxes is our challenge to say, hey, without God, enough never is. You're never going to find the end of those roads. You're never going to be satisfied. You have to find your satisfaction in God. And it's a cautionary tale, because look where these roads lead. Look at the disaster he creates here in this search for satisfaction. It's awful. So without God, enough never is. That is the lesson we can see from Xerxes here. So here's what happens. Now, just so you know, we don't have time to read every single verse. So I'm going to give you I will zoom ahead with the Cliff Notes version, because I think sometimes when you go fast through the Bible, you can see other things that you couldn't see when you're going slow. So he's mad. He's big mad because he doesn't get told no ever, right? Vashti says no, and he's like, what does that word mean? He had to ask his friend, I've never heard that word before. What do you mean no? And he finds out she's not coming. And so his current state is drunk and angry. Great time to make major life decisions, by the way, when you're in that state, right? So he asks his advisors and friends, what should I do? And the rest of chapter 1 is this big discussion over what he should do with Vashti. And what ends up happening is he banishes her from his presence and deposes her as queen. She's no longer queen. So that was their big plan. Tell her she's never... It's kind of like when they suspended people from school for not coming to school. It doesn't make any sense, right? Because he wanted her to come into his presence. She didn't. And he's like, well, you're not allowed then. That doesn't make any sense. But that's what he did here. So she's never allowed to come into his presence again. She's no longer queen. Who knows how she felt about that, because she actually doesn't have any speaking parts in the story at all. Now, so that's the rest of chapter 1. I want to pick it up in chapter 2, verse 1, because check out what happens. But after Xerxes' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. Isn't that a sad little sentence? Because I don't know if I should have told you this. In Persia, when you would make a law, you can't unmake a law, because you could think oh, he's king. You could just say, never mind, come back. But back then, when you made a law like that, it couldn't be undone. So she's not queen anymore. She's not allowed to come into his presence. There's nothing he can do to change that. And now you read that verse and you're like, oh, he's sad about it. He's listening to country music and having feelings and stuff, right? He's sober now and he's like, oh crap, what stupid thing did I do? And you also need to realize, when you're a king, kings back then, when kings got mad, do you know how dangerous that was for everyone anywhere in the vicinity of a king that was angry? Kings could do whatever they want. There were no real laws protecting anybody. If he wanted to say that guy's dead, kill him, kick this queen out, she can never be queen again. In fits of rage, they can do whatever they want. So when he gets these feelings, his attendants are we got to do something. Here's their plan. And this sets up the whole what's about to happen in this book. Verse 2, so his personal attendant suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women to the royal harem at the fortress of Susa. Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, will see to it they are given beauty treatments. Verse 4, after that, the young woman who pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect. Okay, did you catch what they said to do? Let's go find another pretty girl to be queen instead. A rebound, I guess, is what they're suggesting here. But it's again, I want to say it's dark. This is not a Disney movie. This is dark. So I want to give you the Cliff's Notes of chapter 2 as well. Spoiler alert. Esther is chosen as one of the pretty girls, one of the beautiful young virgins to be brought into the palace. And that's pretty crazy, right? 127 provinces, you got to figure they're looking everywhere. So the half of the world, they're bringing these women in, and Esther is chosen as one of them. So something striking about her. Now here's the point in the story where, again, I feel like a lot of people put on their Christian goggles and they dress this up. So the way this was told to me when I was growing up is that this was a beauty contest. This was a beauty pageant. And all these girls basically just gonna put on a pretty dress. They're gonna have a talent show where I don't know what they're gonna do, sing, do hula hoop, whatever, show off some kind of special talent. They're gonna be asked questions. What's your perfect date? She's gonna say April 25th because it's not too hot, not too cold. Anybody? Okay, thank you for the one person that got the reference. Like it's a beauty contest. And or it's either presented like that, or it's like this feel of Cinderella. Remember Cinderella? So it's like a rags to riches kind of thing. Like, oh, you just bring all the girls, and we're gonna have this dance, and whoever the king dances with last, they're gonna dance into the night, and she will be the next queen, and it's gonna be awesome. If you think that way about this story, then you miss the weight of the story, and you're kind of blissfully ignorant of the darkness in the story. So again, I'm trying to keep this PG-13, so I'm asking you to very, very carefully use your imaginations here, but let me read a little bit more so you kind of get a feel for this. Verse 12 of chapter 2. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments. 6 months, it's 6 months of oil and myrrh. You guys are slagging. 12, followed by 6, that was horrible. Cut that. 6 months with special perfume and ointments. I don't know. I feel like my wife takes a long time on makeup, but that's long. 6 months and 6 months. When it was time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing, jewelry she wanted to take from the harem. And then verse 14. That evening, she was taken into the king's private rooms, and then ... And the next morning, she was brought to the second harem, where the king's wives lived. There she would be under the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. She would never go to the king again unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. So what I want you to see is that the king did not choose his next queen in a ballroom. He chose his next queen in the bedroom. This is not a beauty pageant. This is a dictator choosing his next plaything. This story is actually really horrible. And again, I want you to now try and put yourself into Esther's shoes. I want you to feel what Esther would feel here. Once you're chosen for this lurid contest, there's nothing good that can come from it, because this is lose-lose. If she loses, she goes into his harem, into his little trophy room, and she's never able to marry, never able to have her own family, none of that. If she wins, she becomes queen for a maniac, ego-driven, crazy dictator who could fly off the handle at any moment. It's not a good situation, right? And I mean, if you're sitting here thinking, I don't know, she gets to be queen. I don't know, would you want your daughter to, is this what you'd want for your daughter? This is awful. And imagine where she's at. The stuff that she's already endured. Her parents are dead. Her people are in captivity. Now she's ripped out of her home, so the only family she's ever known, their adopted family, now she's ripped out of them. So now she's lost 2 families, and she's pulled into this situation where if she wins, she loses. If she loses, she loses. This is awful. Can you imagine what her prayers are like at that point? What's she praying for? God, where are you? What are you doing? Why would you let this happen? I need you to show up. She's got to be having those gut-wrenching prayers. Now, in order to, what I want to do in this first kind of introductory sermon into this story is I want to give you an overview of this story, because there's a lesson I think that the book of Esther teaches us as a whole that you miss if you dive down into the details. So I just kind of want to back up and look at the book of Esther. But in order to do that, I have to spoil it a little bit. So I'm sorry if you're like, you wanted to do this like week by week. But you get to kind of know some of the end here. So the next chapter, chapter 3, which we'll talk about next week, there is a plot to kill all of the Jewish people in Persia. Genocide, a genocidal plot. One that very, very well could succeed. It's plausible. The second most powerful man in Persia is plotting to kill all of the Jews. Guy's named Haman. We'll meet him next week, and he wants to kill all of the Jews. Now, if you read the Old Testament, you know the Jewish people get in trouble a lot, right? And God saves them every time. God saves them every time. But I want to say, if you read the whole Old Testament, never was there a threat as serious as this. This, Egypt, the classic story of them being slaves, that was bad. But here, genocide is that they are at risk to be wiped off of the planet. So, if you're just reading it from 30,000 foot, you would assume God showed up, God showed up, God showed up, God did miracles, God rended the heavens and came down. If there was ever a time where God's gonna just rip the sky open and be like, no, I'm saving my people, the whole world's gonna know it, you would think this would be a great opportunity for God to boom from heaven or for God to do the miraculous. He doesn't. He doesn't. So another spoiler alert. Esther wins the beauty pageant. She wins. She becomes the reluctant queen. But he's going to use her, to save the Jewish people from annihilation. He's going to use Esther, just Esther. So here's what I want you to see. And if you're not familiar with the Bible, hopefully I can catch you up fast enough. If you are familiar with the Bible, I think this will make sense. So the book of Esther, I think, stands out in the Old Testament. I think the book was written, obviously there's a lot of lessons in it, but I think it was purpose written to teach us one lesson. Overall big, like if a guy was writing his purpose at the top of his paper, there was like one thing he was really trying to get across. And I think it stands in contrast to the most classic story in the Old Testament, which is the Exodus story, okay? If you're not familiar, the Exodus story is where God shows up in Egypt and the 10 plagues happen. Prince of Egypt movie, if you've ever watched that. When God shows up, okay? I want to compare these two stories, Exodus and Esther. I think Esther serves as a lesson to us as an equal opposite of Exodus. In Exodus, God cracks the heavens open, right? And invades Egypt. In Esther, God moves in the shadows. In Exodus, God flexes and shows off his supernatural power. In Esther, he moves behind the scenes. His name isn't even mentioned. In Exodus, God uses astronomical power to deliver his people. In Esther, he uses a powerless peasant girl. So I think one of the reasons the book of Esther exists is to show off God's range. He doesn't have to crack open the sky to save. He doesn't have to send hail and split seas. He can move just as powerfully, quietly as he can loudly. And let me propose that I actually think God moving in the shadows in the book of Esther is a more powerful display than what he did in Exodus. Now I know that sounds crazy, but let me explain. The story of Exodus. If I may, I'm gonna propose an imperfect illustration, but I'm telling you it's imperfect, so I'm still allowed to do it. Let's imagine the book of Exodus as God and Satan playing chess. And the prize is Israel. God is playing Satan, and they got the pieces. If you're familiar with chess, you got the little pawns up front, you got the powerful pieces in back. Satan has his pieces, and God's over here, and he sets the board, and he's like, let's play. Winner takes all. Winner takes the people of Israel. So Satan's like, let's go. And they start. And then God's got some pawns over here, right? He's got Moses and Aaron, and he's moving, and they're talking, and they're saying, let my people go, and all that stuff. But then God goes to work. And his powerful pieces, he starts moving, right? I'm going to send flies. I'm going to send frogs. I'm going to send hail, locusts, darkness in the middle of the day, turn the water into blood. I'm going to split the sea down the middle, and my people are just going to walk right through. God annihilates Satan in this chess game. Just annihilates him like a master playing against a child. Just works him, right? And he walks out, and it's crazy because the story kind of like God just walks out of Egypt, and on his way out, he kicks the door closed, and the whole army's dead, and they're just gone. Like, that's how powerful it is. God is this massive display of power. And I know as Christians, we long for that, right? I mean, there's that verse in Psalms, oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. I wish God would do that. But in Esther, it's different. So same chessboard. And this time, actually, it feels like, Egypt was powerful, but Persia's an empire. Persia spans from Ethiopia to India, right? So Persia's actually more powerful than Egypt was at the time. So Satan's got a whole row of power moves over here, right? He's got a 1,000,000-man army. He's got 127 provinces. He's got the king. He's got the wealth, the power, he's got the culture. Satan's got everything in this story. And God's sitting over here going, let's play again. And Satan's like, bring it. But God's like, hold up a minute. I'm not going to use any of these powerful pieces in the back row. I'm taking all these off. And Satan's like, what? You're not going to? Matter of fact, I only need a pawn. I'll play you pawn on your whole whatever you got going on over there. So God takes one pawn, and goes to work in this story. And the story goes that God uses Esther to save the people of Israel from annihilation. This one girl, this one young peasant, uneducated girl, he takes her and he moves her across the board. And depending on how you play in chess, I don't know what kind of rules you play with, but when I was playing growing up, if you got the pawn to the other side, what happened? Turned into a queen, right? And that's what God does. He moves her down the board, transforms her, and lays waste to Satan's whole plan. Now you tell me which one's more powerful. I love Exodus. I love watching God flex on the world and march out of Egypt. And it is impressive. But man, God's saying, I don't even need all that. I'm going to show you just how powerful I am by not doing any of that and still getting the same outcome. I'm going to take one pawn and I'm going to lay waste to Satan's plans. That's power. Now here's the thing, and this is the truth, and this is where I want to circle back for you. If you're a Christian and maybe you're in a situation where you're like, I'm longing for God to intervene. I want to see the miraculous. I want to hear from God. I want to know the sound of his voice. And maybe you're longing for that. And I don't think that's wrong. But which one's more powerful? What if God's like, hey, listen, I'm not going to crack the sky open. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to move. If you were praying, think about this. From the way I just told, if you were praying, God, I want you to move in the most powerful way possible in my life. Well, then he's going to move behind the scenes. He's going to weave his way into your life in a way that is providential, not miraculous. And he's going to do things that you're even going to have to go, was that God? Was that God? And it clearly is in the story. But his name never gets mentioned. So I know you want God to move with Exodus power in your life, but he might just move like he did in Esther. So here's 3 things quickly that I want you to have as a mindset. When you're praying for the miraculous, when you're praying to hear a voice from heaven, 3 things that you see in the book of Esther. 1, darkness feels closer than God, but it isn't. It feels closer than God. And I bet Esther felt isolated and closed in, like darkness was upon her, but in the story, it's not. He's right there the whole time. He moves these pieces. Yes, some of the stuff that happens to her is awful, but God's not gonna let Satan have a move without his counter move. And he takes these also awful things and he uses them for good. So even though if you feel like in your life darkness is closer, it's not closer than God. He's right there with you. He's right there with you. Second mindset is kind of a question. Are you interpreting your circumstances based off of God, or are you interpreting God based off your circumstances? Does that make sense? So a lot of times when bad stuff starts to happen, you start to use your circumstances as a lens through which to look at God. But it would be better for you to use what you know about God to look at your circumstances. Because if you use your circumstances as a lens, they change constantly. It's gonna, your opinions and thoughts and faith are gonna constantly fluctuate depending on what happens in your life. It would be better for you to flip it and say, whatever happens in my life, I'm gonna use what I know about God to interpret those circumstances. So Esther, if she had done it the wrong way, she would have been like, God's not here. God's not doing anything. Where are the plagues? Where's the Red Sea parting? Where's all the miracles? She would have come to the wrong conclusion about God, but instead, if she flips it and she says, I know these things about God, so even though I don't see what he's doing, he must be doing something. And that's a different kind of faith there. And then the last mindset is if you can't see his hand, you need to trust his heart. John 5:17. Probably not a verse you go to for comfort very often because it's in the middle of a different kind of a story, but I want you to see this. Look at what Jesus says. My Father is always working and so am I. Always. Some of you don't feel like that right now. You feel like God has paused in your life. Like God is like, hold on a minute, and he's going to go do something else. But no, Jesus said, no, God's always working and so is he. Always working. Even when things are dark, even when things don't look good, even when all the circumstances seem to be falling the wrong way, even when everything is pressing against you, he's always working, always working. And that's what, so here's the thing for me, growing up, and I don't know about you, this is me, when I was growing up, I used to kind of think the people that like saw miracles had the biggest faith. Like I used to think it takes faith to see a miracle, right? And you read those stories of Jesus healing people and he talks about, hey, it was faith, it was faith, it was faith. So I used to think that the people who saw miracles had the biggest faith. But as I've grown as a Christian, here's what I want you to know. I think the people who in my life who have prayed for a miracle, not seen it, and still had faith, have the biggest faith. The ones who hold on, the ones who don't let go of him even though he doesn't move in the way that they wanted, the ones who trust him working behind the scenes rather than getting to see the miracle, that is a bigger faith. Man, I want to see miracles, but I also want for you to have the kind of faith that even if God doesn't step in, even if he doesn't rend the heavens, for you to believe, I know he's up to something. I know he's up to something, even if it looks dark, even if everything seems awful, I know he is up to something. Just because I can't see him moving doesn't mean he's not moving. Just because I can't hear his voice doesn't mean he's not speaking. That's next level kind of faith. That's what I want for you. Worship team's gonna come out, they're gonna sing a song, The Goodness of God. Man, I want you to sing that song. Even if you don't sing, I want you to sing that song from right here. Pray with me. God, I pray for the person right now who's going through it, the person who feels like Esther, the person who feels like darkness is closed in, circumstances are not going their way. They're looking for you, Lord. But if they're honest right now, they can't feel you, they can't see you, they can hear you. Lord, I pray that you would whisper to their soul in this moment. That they would know that you are present, that you are working, even if they can't see it, even if they can't feel it. I pray that we would have the faith to say the words, God is good, even when life isn't. I pray that we would, Lord, I pray that every Christian in this room would know, because you died on the cross in their place for their sins, that they would know based off that anything that happens to them can't change the way they think about your love. I pray that we'd lean into that, Lord, to have a faith even when we can't see you moving. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.